Hi, Kaleena. So happy to have you with us. And
Thank you, Natasha.
we already have a bunch of questions for you.
Yes.
So we're going to dive straight in, and going to ask you something super basic, which is what is a brand voice and why is it even important?
Yeah. Okay. My favorite topic, although I will say I speak better through my hands. So I'm a better writer than I am a speaker about this topic. But anyway, it is an exciting one. So hopefully I get the point across. But brand voice essentially is, I just like to simplify it and call it your personality. At the end of the day, people like to work with people. So how do you get that to come across through your writing? And it consists of three basic things. You've got your tone, your cadence, and your vocabulary. And I'll quickly touch on those, but we can dive even deeper and get nerdier for sure. But your tone is kind of the fun part. It's how your emotions are expressed through your writing. So you could be really excitable, kind of like I am, and use lots of exclamation marks and emphasis and descriptive words and things like that. Or you could be rather reserved and monotone, which is totally fine either way. You can be very serious and funny, friendly and open, or reserved. So those are kind of like your basic places to start when you're thinking about tone. And then of course you need a lot more detail. And we can discuss how I actually get down into detail about that kind of tone, but that's basically one part. The next one is cadence. So that's kind of the rhythm or the length of your sentences. If you have really short ones, maybe even 3 words or 4-word sentences, right? Get to the point. Or you like long and languid and flowy sentences that take the user on a journey and you've got lots to say and you're a 16, 17, 18 words per sentence, right? So, or you could be in the middle or a mixture of all those things. This part, as a writer, I like to get nerdy about it, but all you really need to know is short, medium, or long sentences with your cadence. And then lastly is vocabulary, which is just kind of if you like simple language or if you like the complexities of language and you like long, complicated words, which is, again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just defining which ones you use. So those are all those three things together create your brand voice.
And so why is it so important for brands to have a brand voice? And I'm talking in terms of companies that are really relatively new and looking to build a brand. Why does this become so important? And talk us through your experiences of even working with these brands.
Yeah. So yeah, I've definitely worked with people who are just kind of struggling to write. So let me start with like the main reasons why brand voice is important. And I could tell you a little bit about the type of people I work with and why they come to me. One is it's going to help you stand out from the crowd, right? It's your personality. It can help you stand out. And I think a lot of companies kind of get scared at brand voice because they think that if we want to go develop a brand voice or invest money into a brand voice, it means we want to be really funny and out there and wacky and zany like you see on social media with like Twitter and stuff. And you think you need to be like that, or you think you need to be like Liquid Death, which is kind of making a splash in marketing because of their brand voice, and they're quite out there, right? So they kind of imagine that because those people get a lot of attention for those, those brands get a lot of attention because of their brand voice. But really, no matter what you write, you have a brand voice, so you might as well make it really purposeful for many different reasons, right? So you don't have to be that crazy to stand out from the crowd. You just need to look at your competitors in your vicinity and see what they're doing. Because if everybody is super authoritative and kind of buttoned up and like, we have the answers, maybe you want to be the one that's a little bit more vulnerable or a little bit more open and give your customers something they haven't experienced before in your space. If everybody is a goody two shoes and, cute kind of a brand, maybe you want to be a little bit of a rebel, which is kind of what Liquid Death did, but on a scale of like a 10, you could always do it on a scale of a 2, right? So that stuff just makes you look really different with your voice. You don't have to always do it as like competitor research. You just need to be really purposeful, because if you're purposeful with your brand voice, then people are going to remember you anyway, because like I said earlier, people like to do business with people. So if you just have that kind of confident voice coming through, they're going to remember you a little bit more, connect with you a bit more. So it helps you become relatable. And that is like for your audience to remember you. And then of course, one of the biggest reasons why is to scale your content, right? To hire writers, to get more writers to be consistent and sound like you, and to be able to produce more work. And that's really hard to do unless you've defined your brand voice. So it is a really foundational piece of your brand identity, right? A lot of people, when they start building their brand, they're like, okay, we got our visual identity, and they've got a 20 to 50 page document about visual identity and their brand identity with their missions and values, and then they stop there. But the third piece is kind of your voice, and it deserves just as much attention as your visual identity, is your verbal identity. So most people either come to, that's the ideal, is if they're starting a brand and you're creating those foundational pieces, you also do the voice. Nowadays, I do find more people coming to me. Maybe it's because I'm just speaking about brand voice more, that they are actually coming saying, hey, we're launching a brand and we need help with voice. But most people come to me because they struggle with writing, because they know kind of what they sell, but they don't know how to get their messages out there. They don't know who they are. They're having like an identity crisis. So that's usually when they have like that pain point of, I'm struggling like getting my words out there. Or I think you mentioned this earlier, that they're trying to hire writers and they're just spending too much time editing and it doesn't sound like them, and they don't know why their writers are having trouble. So that's kind of usually when people say it might be voice. So let me go figure that out.
That's great. So I think you've developed this chameleon brand guide. I got it right,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I'd love to kind of understand the framework that you have developed, and maybe you can tell us, give us examples as to how to actually apply that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So the chameleon brand voice is made up of the WILD framework. So WILD, and it's very closely connected to the 3 elements of brand voice I mentioned earlier. So you can, like, anybody could take this framework and kind of use it if they want to start putting together guides, but it's the one I use when I'm working with people one-on-one. And bear with me, it's a little bit long because, again, this is a foundational part of a brand. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. But to give you the gist, you have the W, which is your words. So again, like the vocabulary. So we'll look at regional slang, like in the US, you might say pop instead of soda, just like those little things like that. If you're from the US versus the UK, a little bit more international types of spelling. You want to look at jargon. If you use jargon or you don't, that's going to depend on your audience. You want to make sure you're speaking their language too and stuff that they understand. So but you'll want to write down what kind of jargon you use, terms in your space. So just listing out how you name your products, your services. For the example of like Pepper content, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw it was like called creators. You don't always say the word freelancers. People are called creators. So that's a specific way you call freelancers. So you want to make sure that's always consistent. So just naming down those words like that. You can also get super specific and say creator, capital C, not creator, lowercase c, not freelancer, capital F. There's things like that. So that's kind of like a mixture of a style guide as well, but that can all go together under W. It can also be words you don't use. I think that's always really fun. I've worked with a lot of skincare companies in the past, and they're all going away from the word anti-aging. So a lot of the documents we've put together says don't use the word anti-aging. We use pro-aging instead, for example. So that's under words to make sure people aren't using terms that you don't want to be using anymore, or outdated terms. Next, we've got I, which is isms. So kind of like your mannerisms. I've added this one because I do work with personal brands as well. So they've got more of those quirks. It doesn't have, it's not as long when you come to like B2B companies. But with personal brands, they have a lot of isms. So that could be just phrases that come out of your mouth naturally, a whole bunch. I worked with a client the other day, and it was a marketing company, but she was the face of the marketing company. So it was under her voice. And she used a lot of adverbs. And so if you look at best practices on the internet, it says don't use adverbs because they're weak forms of writing, but she used a lot of adverbs. So that's also why it's important to have these guides, because if you're a writer, you might never use an adverb thinking, oh, standard practices don't use an adverb. But then she's going to read this writer's writing and say, this doesn't sound like me because it doesn't have a single adverb in it. So we have to mention things like that, like, we actually love adverbs here, but instead of saying the word likely, we might say theoretically. Instead of saying very, we'll say utterly or highly. Like, she liked really quirky adverbs. So like, what does that look like? And so we put that under isms. It could also be cursing. That's a really fun one for me. So if the brand curses a lot, like, how do they curse? What's too much? What's too little? Do we spell out the curse word? Do we put an asterisk? So we're kind of bleeping it out. Those fun parts kind of go under isms. Two more. So next we've got length, which again is like the cadence, so the length of your sentences. So I've got a couple tools that you can plop in some documents and it'll actually calculate mathematically the rhythm of your sentence. So if you go, a lot of people go medium, long, short. So that's kind of a really good way to write a paragraph if you're kind of losing attention, and then you come in with a short sentence and that kind of gets people in again. So if you're really into writing, you can get that nerdy about it. But I would always suggest, just as long as you have how long your headlines are, how long a standard paragraph is, if it's just 2 to 3 sentences, which kind of looks good on the internet. If you like to break up sentences with lots of space, or you kind of like them chunky, that stuff is really important because you'll visually see the length, right? Like, think about a LinkedIn post. Like, some people have like
That's
three
exactly,
words.
yeah.
Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, exactly what I went to. Yeah.
Yeah, like 3 words, 3 words, 3 words. And some people, yeah, that one's standard. And, I kind of have like a mixture, maybe 6 to 7 words. So that kind of visually, you'd see that on LinkedIn, right? So that's kind of stuff that would go under length if you're very picky on that. And then, yeah, lastly is delivery, which is the tone, which is kind of the more difficult part, because that's where a lot of companies try to put their brand voice, and they'll say, we're friendly and authentic. And so they come up with a couple words, but that's really not good enough for a writer. It's really not saying much. It's kind of like saying to a designer, we use red and green. I don't know what to do with that red and green. Like, I need specific shades and stuff. So I always say to brainstorm at least 20 different words, and you can go to your audience and just post something on Instagram, like, describe us in 1 word, send out an email, just like get a collection of words. And then use that to kind of group them together, because you'll get things that are similar. And then once you group them together, then you can kind of choose like your pillar voice, which might be friendly, but now you've got at least some color to it. So for example, you might get bubbly, playful, joyous, and then those could all be grouped under positive, right? But if you said we're positive and friendly, that doesn't say much. But now if you say we're bubbly and we're playful, that gives the writer a lot more to work with. That gives even the brand a lot more sense of identity, right? Same thing with funny. Like, what type of funny are you? Are you sarcastic? Do you like dark humor? Do you like pun? Are you punny? Do you like just putting things in an aside? Are you self-deprecating? Like, there's so many shades to these words. So it's really just about being very, 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 very specific. And also, if you can give actual examples, like, here's a sentence of us being funny. Here's an example of us being bubbly. This is what it looks like. You can also try the this but not that method to kind of put you in the middle. We are vulnerable, but we're not self-deprecating, for example. That was a terrible example, but it's like this, not that. Just puts you somewhere in the middle. So basically that would be the entire part of a brand voice. With my chameleon guides, we can like sometimes they're upwards of 50 pages. I would call like the WILD, the wild framework, that could easily be 10 pages, 20 pages even. Sometimes my guides could even go to 40 and 50 if you're putting a lot of examples and you're doing competitor research. This is what the competitor sounds like. This is what we sound like. And then of course, like a style guide added to it could easily make that, 40 pages, right? Because then you've got all your lexicon and stuff. But to not be overwhelming with like thinking about creating a 40-page guide, you could just start with the wild framework, and that's going to be plenty for everybody to work with for sure.
So I have a question, because I've been talking about stuff from the brand's point of view. But at times I feel like a lot of the voice of the brand needs to be a reflection of the audience or the target persona that they're targeting. So does that factor in anywhere in
Yes.
defining the brand voice?
Yeah, it should be a mixture of two. So I would say definitely with the W, like with the words, just going and doing research about how they speak about your product. Sometimes I just put in word banks. Like if you don't know what to do with those words yet, you could just create a word bank of like, we call it like sticky copy. So words that sound unusual. Like you might want to say your product is unique, but your customers are probably not going to say it's unique. So just going and find out how they're talking about your product. If you haven't launched yet, you just go see how they're talking about things in your space, right? And grabbing little phrases that kind of sound like, I never would have thought of that, or I never would have described it like that, and just putting that in your document and using that as like a grab bag of phrases can be really helpful under words. And any good copywriter will know what to do with that when they're actually writing. And so this because that's more like with website copy, right? That stuff is really important in your email copy to be reflecting how your customers speak. When you use this guide to write content, you're more doing the education, and that's when they're connecting with your personality a lot and stuff. So I don't think you need to do as much like voice of customer data in your actual content. But for web copy, that's really important. So just doing that research to grab a sticky copy, again, with like jargon. So understanding their level of knowledge so that you are not speaking down to them because they understand, and also not speaking too high up so that they get confused. So really deciding how you're going to be talking about jargon. If you're going to like introduce a word and then briefly explain it in a paragraph, like getting really that specific, like introduce a term and then put it in a like in parentheses, because that's all that they need to know is like like to remember very quickly, right? That's one way. Again, with the tones, like if you actually go to your customers, so if you've already launched and everything, your customers have already started, you have some success. So a lot of people come to me at that point, like, we're doing really well, but we need help with like getting more copy out there. And you go to your audience and say, what do we sound like to you? Like, you're giving them more of that. Like, you can also look at your highest performing content, a really good ad, a blog post that did really well, an email where people were like, oh, I love this, and they message you back. Like, that's content that they want to see from you. So you can look at those pieces for your tones and see what really attracted those customers to you, right? And give them more of that. So that's really good. So it is a mixture. And so if you want to help your copywriters, I would say adding in just more of those word banks of like, this is exactly our pain points and stuff. But then we're kind of talking a little bit more of brand identity and, doing some of the work of copywriters. When you hire a copywriter, they should be doing this stuff for you anyway. So I would, if you don't know, like, if voice of customer data is like, oh, I don't want to do that, I want to hire a copywriter to do that stuff for you, like, they could also be providing that stuff separately. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's pull back. I think there are a lot of valuable nuggets here, even for writers, right? And of course, you work as a freelance writer. So I would, if you can simplify this, I know it's a very broad question, but can you give me some tips around good writing? Like, how do you define good writing?
Yeah, a couple different things. So in this context, I think any good writer should be, even if you don't have a brand voice guide, they should be reading your content and getting a feel for your brand voice, right? And who you are and trying to represent you. And a great writer will do that accurately, right? But of course, giving them a guide will help. But I think good writing at the end of the day is good writing, and doesn't, brand voice punches it up and helps in a lot of way. But anyway, just good writing to me is a little bit more general. So I would say it's purposeful. So you have purpose. So always sitting down and thinking, what's the goal of this writing? In marketing speak, like, what's the CTA? It should always have one takeaway you want your audience to have, because what happens is a lot of writers, or sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs, they just are so excited and they say, oh, but we also do this, and we also do that, and we also offer this. And then that's when things get muddy and your audience gets confused. So having one clear goal and having a purpose for your writing is good. Next, I would say is being clear and concise. And I think any writer would say that. And so clarity, if you have a goal, I think it's going to be more clear, right? Because you know what point you're trying to get across. Also being concise would be being ruthless in your editing process. So editing, saying, how can we say this in half the amount of words, right? It's being consistent. So with your words, your length, your tone, that's when style guide comes in, like your spelling, how you use your commas, how you use em dashes, all that stuff should be really consistent. And you can have consistency errors that are like, sale ends at midnight and the next day say sale ends at 7. Like, that's obviously a big consistency error. But even the small ones, like changing up how you called something or an opinion, that stuff, even as small as like a comma, sometimes that can throw off your readers, even if they don't necessarily realize. So being really consistent. And then lastly, I think any writer would agree with those three, but then I would also say confidence in your writing. So that's where a brand voice can really help as well, because people who stand out and attract leads or people and audience are confident in who they are and what they want to say and how they want to say it. And if you've got a strong opinion, you've got strong values, that type of confidence, that really helps your writing stand out. And even if you're like a vanilla opinion person and you kind of stay in the middle, as long as that's consistent, right, and clear and purposeful, that's okay too. So it all comes together, because again, I don't like to say there's any like right or wrong way to have a brand voice, but yeah, all those together makes great writing at the end of the day.
And how do you think brands, like, what are a few things that brands can do to make the lives of freelancers easier, right? Like, we discussed this before we jumped into this conversation about how a guideline is actually, it benefits the brand as well as, the writers that they work with, because at the end of the day, there is a misalignment when you get articles from freelancers that just sound very different from what you are trying to project as a brand. So what are a few things that brands can do better?
They can provide an onboarding document. It could be your brand voice guide that we talked about. It could be just a style guide. It should be a combination of both, in my humble opinion. So what I've been a freelance writer, I don't know, 8 years at least, and maybe 2 companies have given me a style guide, like an onboarding guide. And like I said before, a good writer will go and try to figure out your voice and read your old content so they sound like you. But why not make their life easier and just give them hey, this is what we like to see. And so again, being very specific with your brand voice. I had an example of one of the first ones I ever received that I was like, wow, this is so helpful. It's from a travel company, and they described, so again, this is why these documents can sometimes get 40 pages long, because you can also add these additional things. They said, here's the type of content we produce. We produce personal stories. We produce top 10s, like listicles and places to visit, but they're always from people who are here. So just really like, this is the type of content we want to see. That stuff is so helpful instead of trying to figure out who this brand is. They also said we hate generalizations. So don't ever say anything like sweeping vistas or hidden gem. Like that's kind of cliche in the travel industry. So we don't want that. So that stuff is super, super helpful. You can also add an onboarding process. So this is what working together is going to look like. So that's really great for onboarding your writers. The ones that I receive a lot from B2B companies are just like lists. Don't turn in your document until you've checked your H1, until you've added SEO, until you've done this. That stuff is fine for the editor, but it's not like going to help your writer become a better writer for you. So I think all those things need to be combined together. Again, fleshing out the style guide. How's your grammar and punctuation? All that stuff is going to really make your writers feel empowered to represent your brand well and cut down on the editing process. Because I know a lot of editors they kind of feel like, oh, it's just easier for me to just edit this because this isn't on brand. And then your writer never really knows what might have been off. So just hand them a guide that says what is kind of off for us and what's on brand, and everything's going to be more streamlined, and your writers are going to have the tools that they need to write correctly for you. And again, these guides could be long, but you'll just jump to the parts that you need, right? That when you need it. So that's kind of what it's there for. And it's definitely a win-win for both people, right?
That's great, Kaleena. I think, I told you we've been struggling with a brand guide of our own, and it's so critical, not just for, to work with freelancers, but I think internally, because that now there are multiple people creating content, multiple stakeholders. So having a cohesive voice that sounds like one brand and not 10 is super important. I loved this session. I loved takeaways as a marketer and also takeaways as a writer. I think we checked both boxes. I think this is exactly the kind of session that would interest both these kind of audiences, right? So thanks so much. I'm so glad I reached out to you. And yeah, and this framework sounds like a lot of work, I have to say, for you to break down the nuances like this in a 40-page document. I think it's hats off to you for putting so much of time and energy, and clearly you're a bit of a nerd about this kind of stuff. So
yeah. Oh, it's fun for me. Yeah, it's so much fun looking at how people write and putting down the little things that they do so writers can sound on brand. And also, like you said, like when you have so many hands in the cookie jar, like it gets really confusing. So even just doing a 10-page guide is going to give so much clarity because you've defined things, and a lot of people don't sit down and go, okay, we're gonna do it like this, we're gonna sound like this. Like the amount of clarity that people walk away with, like, oh, I just feel like I understand my brand better now because now I see it in action and I see it in writing. But that stuff is super fun for me. But of course, like it doesn't have to be 40 pages. It could be 1 page for words, 1 page for isms, 1 page for length, 1 page for delivery, 1 page for important grammar and punctuation, right? You've got a 5-pager that's going to help everybody.
Wow. I still think that's amazing that you broke this down, and this framework sounds fantastic.
Thank you. I hope you use it for your
I think I'm going to get down to it and actually create something, and then I will send it to you, and then you can just tell me that it's rubbish. So.
I'm sure it'd be great, but I'll give you some feedback.
That's great. Thanks, Kaleena. What a great chat. I think this was great fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.